They gave me Thorazine when I was young. I want to begin there because of what Thorazine is. And I know exactly what it is, which is its own small revenge. Chlorpromazine, the first true antipsychotic. The drug that arrived in the 1950s and was hailed as a breakthrough for one reason above all others. It gave psychiatry something to do instead of the lobotomy. Before it, the answer to a difficult mind was an ice pick through the orbit and a stir of the frontal lobe, the prefrontal leucotomy, the severing of the part of the brain where the self actually lives. Thorazine was the humane alternative. That is the company my childhood medication kept. It was the thing they reached for so they wouldn't have to reach for the knife. So when I say thank God I wasn't found around for the era when they did that, when they cut the lobes out of people for the crime of being hard to manage, I mean it with a gallows gratitude that only makes sense once you know how close the two things sit on the shelf. I got the chemical version. A generation earlier, I might have gotten the surgical one, and there would be no theses, no novel, no me. Just a quiet, blunted thing wearing my name. The drug dulled the signal. The knife would have cut the wire. I was dulled. I was not cut. That distinction is the whole reason I am able to write this sentence, and I do not take it lightly. But understand what it means to medicate a young mind that way. It is a verdict rendered early that the mind in question is a problem to be quieted, rather than a signal to be understood, whatever the intentions, and I will not pretend to know all of them. The message a child absorbs in total. Your way of being is not a way of being. It is a malfunction. We will turn it down. That is the first thing I learned about my own mind, that the people in charge of it would rather it be quieter. The home matched the chemistry. My father ruled my early childhood with a heavy hand, and between the heavy hand and the medication I learned, very young, the same lesson from two directions, that authority would manage me by force or by dose, but it would not read me. And I was, I think now, profoundly misread. A mind that worked by connection rather than by line, that traced real edges between things other people couldn't see and got called scattered, random, circular for the effort. The signal was always there. It was just never received at the volume it was sent. A connected mind, medicated for being connected. A child quieted for thinking in a shape the room couldn't allow. That is the origin of nearly everything I believe now. The thorough distrust of illegitimate authority. The hatred of power that manages rather than understands. The reverence I would later develop for the mind itself. You do not have to dig for the root. It was planted early, by a hand and by a dose. And it grew into a man who would spend his life insisting that a genuine article, a real mind, a real thing, deserves to be understood before it is judged, and never, ever quietly turned down. I will not launder the middle of the story. I made poor decisions, not small ones, and not briefly. I spent years on an engine with no governor, and the fuel I chose was the kind that takes everything and gives back nothing but the next craving. A decade of it. I squandered time, which my own conscience now holds to be close to the only unforgivable sin. And I squandered it on the exact thing my whole philosophy would later be built to oppose. The cheap counterfeit chosen over the genuine article. The displacement of the real with the hollow. I did to myself what I now grieve when corporations do it to the things I love. I hollowed myself out, and I wore my own name over the gap. It ended where the road ends. Prison. I'm not going to dress it up or hide behind it. I went. I served the years. And the years were real. The engine that had built nothing and burned everything finally ran out of road. And the state took what was left and held it in a box for a while. There's no version of this where I am the blameless victim of it. I drove there. I want that on the record. Because accountability is the price of being allowed to tell the rest of the story. And because a man who will not own the fall has no right to own the climb. And then, this is the part I do not get to take credit for. And the part I will never stop being staggered by. I was given my last chance. Most of the minds I revere never got one. Howard Hughes died in a dark room. The companies I grieve were hollowed and discarded with no second act. The list of the magnificent that went awry is long, and almost none of them came back. I was on that list. I should be a cautionary tale told in the past tense. Instead, I got a door. When I had no right to expect one. And I walked through it. And I've been clean on the other side of it for years now. I understood, in a way most people are mercifully spared, exactly what a second chance costs and exactly how rarely it comes. That understanding is not abstract for me. It is the load-bearing fact of my life. It is why I cannot waste time anymore. Not because waste is inelegant, but because I know what it is to lose years, and I know they do not come back. And I was handed an armful of them I had already forfeited. You do not squander a gift like that twice. Not if you understand the first lesson at all. Coming back is not the same as being fine, and I won't pretend the climb was a montage. Post-prison was its own long grind. The pressure of rebuilding a life from below zero, of a mind that runs hot under the best conditions, running hot under the worst. Of carrying everything I've described here while trying to assemble something livable out of the wreckage. The pressure was, and at times still is, immense. The same intensity that makes the mind worth anything also makes it a hard place to live when there is nowhere for it to go. And here's what saved me. And it is almost too neat, except that it is simply true. I started getting the thoughts out. Writing. Putting the mind onto the page. Externalizing the storm. Giving the pressure a place to discharge. It wasn't my own nervous system and wasn't the old poison. The thoughts had always been there, at full volume, with nowhere to land, and a mind full of unexpressed signal. At that pressure, is a dangerous place. The moment I began to serialize it, to lay the connected web out in a line where it could finally leave my head, the pressure found its valve, and my sanity, which had been holding on by its fingernails under a weight I rarely let anyone see, started to hold. Sit with the symmetry of it. Because this is the whole point. They medicated me young to suppress the mind, to turn the signal down, to quiet the thing that was too much. And what finally kept me sane, decades later, was the exact opposite. Not suppression, but expression. Not turning the mind down, but letting it out. Salvation was the inverse of the original wound. The thing they tried to chemically quiet is the thing that, when finally allowed to speak, kept me alive and whole. Writing is the anti-Thorazine. It does not blunt the signal. It carries it. Out of the pressurized chamber of a single skull and onto a page where where it can be a thing instead of a threat. So that is the title and the truth of it. They dulled me, but they did not cut me. The home ruled me, but it did not erase me. The decade of poison took my years, but it did not take the mind that was making them. And prison held me, but it did not keep me. Through all of it, by chemistry and by hand, and by my own worst, excuse me, by my own worst choices, and by a system built to box the wreckage, the one thing that survived intact was the genuine article underneath. The connected high pressure, misread, unquiet mind they tried so many ways to manage. It was never severed. It was only ever waiting for the one thing nobody thought to offer it. Not a dose, not a knife, not a cell, but a channel, a way out, a page. I am not a cautionary tale. I came too close to being one, and I honor the ones who became them. And I know the difference between us is partly grace and partly the door I was handed, and partly the simple refusal to waste what I got back. But the mind is whole. It survived the quieting. It survived the fall. It is, finally, speaking. And as long as it has a page to speak on, too, the pressure has somewhere to go, and the genuine article stays exactly what it always was. Under everything they tried, unsevered, intact, and finally, after all of it, heard.